G'day, I'm Steve. G'day, I'm Steve, Woodworking Masterclass. Welcome to my workshop. This DIY project I'm going to share with you today is one that's going to give you a lot of credibility, especially in the kitchen and the home front. It's a knife block. You know how you've got all these knives floating around in the drawers and people cut themselves, or if you've got a really good knife, it gets damaged and bruised and bent and they all go dull. Well, what I thought about was making a knife block. And sure, you can buy them, but most of them are generic. How wonderful to make a knife block that is unique to the kitchen that you have. So if you've got a big meat cleaver, you can put that in there. If you've got a large steel, you can put that in there. All you've got to do is measure the blades. Get it from the hilt to the tip, that's 220. Steak knives, they're 120. So we take the longest knife, and if you're going to have a steel, measure the steel. Now this one's quite a long steel, but most steels are around 300 mil long. But measure and find out what your knives are. The other thing is, if you've got a set of verniers, grab them and measure across the width of the back of the blade. Now once you've done that, you'll know how deep to cut and what width to cut. Most steels you can get away with 19 mil. So we'll leave that as 19 mil. And meat cleavers, they vary. Some of them are 100 wide, some are 150 wide, and you'll have to orientate the size of your block or the timber you start with compared to the size of the cleaver if you're going to put a cleaver housing in there. What I've done is drawn up a bit of a plan of how I want the knife block to look. So I want to have a slope in the front, a flat at the top, and these are the compartments I'm going to put in it. So in order to do that, I need 6 bits of timber. I'm just going to use ordinary utility grade pine for this. And so 6 bits of timber at 300 long gives me about 1.8. If you go to your timber shop, that's a pretty standard size that they sell. In fact, it's a little bit over 1.8, and that's great because that means you've got enough there to take care of any wastage through the kerf of the blade. I'll show you an easy way to do it. There is a slightly more complicated way to do it, but we'll start with the easy way and I'll show you how you can go from a square block to the block that I want to join. So first of all, lay out your board. Make sure you can get 6 lengths of 300 out of it. We've divided it up, number them from 1 to 6. That way you know which order you've cut them. And then we'll go over to the saw and dock all that to length. As you can see here, I've set up a stop. Now that stop is at 300 mil from the blade. So with that stop there, when I put my timber on there, it's going to all be docked at the same length. Okay. Now we've got 6 bits, chronological order or numbered order if you like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And by doing it that way and taking it out of one single piece of timber, we then get a nice pattern of the grain. So it's all uniformed. Now if you wanted to do a square knife block, that's where you could stop. just here, and we'll route the bits out for the knives. But what I want to do is have mine a sloping knife block this way and then a flat section at the top. So I'll show you how to do that. If you've got a table saw that has a mitre on it, or a drop saw that has a mitre, that's the easiest way. If not, you could use a bandsaw or a jigsaw. It just takes a little bit more cleaning up with sanding in the finish. So I'll go over to the drop saw, change the angle to 45, and we'll just mitre. Not all of these, we're going to actually just mitre 4 of them, because these I want to be square and flat at the top. Get the first 4 bits of timber, so that's the ones that are numbered 1, 2, 3 and 4. And the top half we're going to mitre. Okay, so we've been over to the drop saw and I've cut 45 degrees on the first 4 pieces of timber. Remember, we've marked them from 1 to 6. This is 1, 2, 3, 4. 5 and 6 we still have in the original form. So if you put it together, that's what it looks like so far. But you can see it's starting to take shape if I spread these out. Now at this stage, if you want, you can dock off these ends here, but what I prefer to do is route them all in the same length. It's a little bit safer, you've got a longer bit of timber you're working with the router, and it's just as easy to dock it at the other end. So to mark everything out, what I do is get a marking gauge, set it at 10 mil, or you can set it whatever you like. I set it at 10 mil. The main reason is the meat cleaver that I'm going to make allowance for here is about 95 mil wide. So I've got 110 mil there. So if I take 10 mil each side, that'll bring me back to 100, which will allow the cleaver to sit in there nicely with a little bit of play each side. If you're not using a meat cleaver, by all means you can have the edges wider if you want. I wouldn't go much narrower than say 6 mil, because then you lose a lot of strength in the side. There we have it, that's marked. All I have to do is set up the router to one of these marks, and then the rest of it just sort of follows on. Here's another idea which might help you so you don't get confused, is mark out on the tops how you want your knife block to look. That's the plan I've got there. So what I'll do, on the tops of these, I'll mark those positions with a pencil. Now I've got a steel to go in here, and with the steel I actually route out 2 sides. So I'll route a 19 mil hole there and a 19 mil there. So that means this front part will get routed and the back part of this will get routed. That's the only one I do it in. Everything else I will router the knives on the face. So in this case I've got, it's a 50 mil. That's generally a bread knife or something. And on this one I'll have a narrower knife and a wider knife, and 2 narrower knives here. This one will be the meat cleaver, so I know that's going to be a large slot. and then I'll have 3 paring knives in here, and of course the front panel doesn't get anything at all, so there's no routing on the back or the front. And while we're here, we'll get that sticker off. Nice sharp chisel will generally do it. There we go. Something for Bob to chew on later on. Whoops, put those down there. So now I've marked all that and I know what ones have to go where. Now I choose my router bits. And what I've got here is an 18mm bit, which I'll use for the steel. There's a 1-inch bit, which I'll use for the front steak knives. And there's a 38mm bit, which I'll use for the larger knives. Now sometimes you'll have to do 2 passes with 1 router bit to get the desired width, especially when it comes to cutting out the recesses for the cleaver, because it's a lot wider, so therefore you obviously can't get a router bit that wide. So be careful and use your router table the way it's meant to be designed. I'll go over to mine and route these now, but only do things that are safe. Understand what your router table is capable of, understand how to use your router, and then proceed with safety. I'll be back in a moment with these routed. Oh, and don't forget safety equipment. If you're using any power tools at all, make sure you've got a set of glasses, a set of earmuffs. Then you're safe. All right, be back in a moment. Okay, I've been to the router. Must admit, I had a slight change of plan halfway through. I'd like to say it was by design, but I did make a mistake, but it doesn't matter. I've just changed. Instead of having 3 knives at the front, I've had 2, and I had a great idea. What we'll do is I'll show you how to make a little steak knife block, and that's what that section in the front was for, steak knives. So, who knows, perhaps a mistake worked out for the best. As you can see, here, which is where the steel goes, it's actually in 2 parts. So I've routed on the inside of the back and then on the reverse side of panel number 5. So when you put it together, that then gives you a nice square hole to put your steel in. We've got a large carving recess there, 2 knives there, another 2 knives there. That's the rebate to take the carver, and this is where I made an executive decision. So when we put it all together, and now you can see the knife block starting to take shape. All we have to do is trim these bits off here. Now you can trim them off if you want before you actually start routing. That is an option, but as I said before, I like to have a longer piece of timber when I'm using a router. So now we'll just dock them off to length. Quite easy to do, I'll show you. Turn the knife block upside down. These 2 pieces are the same size. So that's number 6, number 5. Put number 5 on number 4 and line up so the angle and the top meet along there. If there's any overage, in this case there's not, you dock that off. So then take number 4, likewise, place number 3 with it, so it's nice and even. And then as you can see, here there's a bit of overhang. So take that over to the saw and dock that off. And what I do is use the longest one as the guide to cut the waste off. So here, this is the longest one. So now we come down here, use it as a guide to cut the back off. Now take the one we just cut, use it as the template for the next one. Saw down, bring it up to there, cut that one. We use the last one we just cut for the cover plate. Same thing. Line it up. And cut. And there we have it. One knife block all ready to go together. We've got a nice pattern on the grain, all concentric growth rings, because we use the same piece of timber. Now what we've got to do is glue it up, clamp it, and we'll let it dry.